capabilities invariably always lead to tactics. They are building a triad of the BrahMos. There are air-launched versions, there are ground-launched versions with different ranges. They're expanding the range from 290 to around 900 kilometers. So India's enrichment program is around 35% enrichment. So they are very close to weapons grade levels, and there is no system of safeguard, so nobody knows how much of that has already been enriched to weapons grade. So the problem is that when conventional counterforce strikes are conducted in a preemptive manner against a nuclear weapon state during a crisis, against command and control, against a deployed strategic system, it will have very dangerous escalatory consequences. Pakistan's missile program has been the subject of criticism and negative attention for more than 2 decades now. The primary focus, the primary purpose of keeping the spotlight on Pakistan's program is essentially to divert attention from a much bigger proliferation threat that is emerging in South Asia, namely India's nuclear program, which is, even though it is civilian, but most of it is outside the safeguards of the International Atomic Energy Agency. So it's important to understand the background of the direction, scope, and trajectory of India's nuclear capabilities that have been building up over the past 15 years. So India essentially can qualify to be the fourth nuclear peer after United States, Russia, China. So they are on the path to becoming the fourth biggest nuclear weapon state outside the NPT over the next decade. And I will walk you through some of the key developments that have been taking place. So essentially, India is pursuing a strategy of damage limitation. So damage limitation was a strategy that the United States started to pursue during the Cold War against the Soviet Union. And it has two components. One component is the ability to intercept incoming first strike or incoming ballistic missiles. Coupled with that is the ability to carry out preemptive counter-force strikes against the adversary. Now, this essentially is the strategy that India is pursuing through two pathways. One is conventional counterforce. They are raising an integrated rocket force consisting of standoff weapons. Some of those weapons were used in Operation Sindhu against Pakistan last month. So that was a template like the BrahMos. There are different estimates, but it is estimated that they have around anywhere between 1,000 and 1,500 BrahMos. Now the Indians claim that the BrahMos is conventionally armed. It is not a nuclear armed system. But as far back as 2009, 2010, India's Cabinet Committee on Security, they had designated that at least 3 dozen Su-30 MKI fighters would be designated to carry the BrahMos under the auspices of India's Strategic Forces Command, which means that it also has a dedicated nuclear wing. But they are building a triad of the BrahMos. There are air-launched versions, there are ground-launched versions with different ranges. They're extending the range from 290 to around 900 kilometers. All their naval warships are equipped with the BrahMos, and the BrahMos is a canisterized system, the ground-launched BrahMos. So canisterized means that it can be launched on very short notice. Secondly, they are building indigenous Nirbhay long-range cruise missiles, which are subsonic. BrahMos is supersonic, but Nirbhay is subsonic. So Nirbhay will become it was at one point called the backbone of Cold Start because it will be able to carry a much bigger payload, around 1,000 kilograms. But it is dual use, just like the BrahMos. And then there are an assortment of other standoff weapons that they have at their disposal, which could only be conventional. So the problem is that when conventional counter-force strikes are conducted in a preemptive manner against a nuclear weapon state during a crisis, against command and control, against a deployed strategic system, it will have very dangerous escalatory consequences. Because this creates a discrimination problem if there are dual use systems coming in, because you don't know if the incoming missile has a conventional or a nuclear warhead. And if a strategic system, deployed strategic system during a crisis, is targeted even with a conventional counter-force strike, it will be taken as a nuclear first strike by Pakistan. So this is a very, very dangerous. But from an Indian standpoint, they're still saying that there is no change in the declaratory no first use policy, but all these capabilities will allow them sufficient operational flexibility to conduct comprehensive first strikes using conventional and dual use systems. And then they can always say that this was not a nuclear strike, this was a conventional counter-force strike. Now, I'll give you the example of Oreshnik. So, for example, Russia carried out a MIRV, multiple warheaded strike against a Ukrainian target using Oreshnik. The United States has been working on CPGS, comprehensive prompt global strike long-range system. China is known to be working on a conventional counter-force, ICBM also. So conventional counter-force, these are strategic conventional weapons. Some of them are dual use, some of them are conventional, but they are as destabilizing as anything else. Secondly, so the Indian plan is essentially to try to build a missile shield against around their main population and leaders, and then they could either retaliate massively, or they could conduct a preemptive strike of their own. And for that purpose, they are also building a comprehensive military satellite constellation, and they've announced that they will add an additional 52 satellites over the next few years for target acquisition and ISR. The second important component of this program is, which is essentially the backbone of India's nuclear capability, is the stockpiling of nuclear weapons material, also known as fissile material, outside the safeguards of the International Atomic Energy Agency. Now, you might recall that in 2005, the United States entered a civilian nuclear deal with India, which was finalized in 2008. And in 2008, the International Atomic Energy Agency and the Nuclear Suppliers Group approved a separation plan for India's nuclear facilities. Under that separation plan, more than half of India's civilian dual-use fuel cycle and nuclear energy facilities were kept outside the safeguard system of the IAEA, including 8 heavy water power reactors, their fast breeder reactor program, their uranium enrichment program, and all reprocessing program, and plutonium production capability, and all other aspects of the nuclear fuel cycle. And they, in order to satisfy the Nuclear Suppliers Group, they volunteered to keep some of the power reactors under safeguards. But much of their ability to produce fissile material outside safeguards was retained as it was earlier. Secondly, as part of this deal, they were able to import uranium, which earlier they had to use for both their civilian and military program, and now they have an option of substituting their indigenous uranium for the civilian program with imported uranium, so that they could use their indigenous uranium for the military program. And right before the deal, they were saying that they were running short of uranium even for the civilian program. But suddenly, after 2008, they were able to find very large reserves of natural uranium. The third important aspect is the weapons potential of India's stockpile. So currently, India has around 11 tons of separated plutonium. This is civilian plutonium, but it is outside safeguards. Their uranium enrichment program, they have around 6 tons of highly enriched uranium, and they are on the path to increase their capacity to produce weapons-grade plutonium. Their current capacity is around 26 kilograms per year, and they are, once the fast breeder reactor is commissioned by next year, the 500 megawatt prototype fast breeder reactor, this will increase to 180 kilograms. So, and they have plans for 5 additional fast breeder reactors, which means that once those 5 or 6 fast breeder reactors are completed, India will be able to produce 1,000 kilograms of weapons-grade plutonium per year. Right now, they are producing only 26 kilograms of weapons-grade plutonium, and that is sufficient for more than 200 warheads per year. But there are 8 power reactors that are outside safeguards. They produce about 1.2 tons of plutonium every year. That's outside safeguards. So this is probably the largest single fissile material production program in the world outside safeguards, because China has just started working on its own fast breeder reactor, but that was in 2017. India has been working on its fast breeder since 2004. So this is another, if you look at the timeline, it is now even giving rise to China's security considerations. Not only Pakistan, but China also. Because China had stopped producing fissile material as far back as 1989. But India has continued to produce fissile material, plutonium especially, since 1965. They have never stopped it. And they are also expanding their uranium enrichment program. Again, the pattern is that they're saying that this uranium enrichment program is for their nuclear submarines. It is not weapons grade. It is 35%. But as we know, as we have seen in Iran's case, they don't have weapons grade highly enriched uranium.
Yes.
But once a country is able to enrich uranium from 0.7% in natural uranium to 5%, more than 4/5 of the time and effort required to produce weapons grade has already been covered. So India's enrichment program is around 35% enriched uranium. So they are very close to weapons grade levels, and there is no system of safeguard, so nobody knows how much of that has already been enriched to weapons grade levels. So this material is latent so far, in the sense that we really don't know how much of this has been converted into warheads. So the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists, every year they produce estimates. They've been saying that Pakistan has, for example, 172 warheads, and India has 180 warheads. And nobody knows the actual number, because none of these countries have made any declarations, and there is no system of safeguards, because both of them are outside the NPT. But given the scope and size of India's growing missile arsenal, if you just look at the number of tests, missile tests going on over the last 5 years, they're at least 20 times more than that of Pakistan. It is quite clear that India has this latent capability and a hedging capability that they are planning to weaponize at some stage, for which different platforms are being tested. Okay. So as I mentioned earlier, there is a triad of the BrahMos. They are also working on the hypersonic version of the BrahMos and a lighter version of the BrahMos that can be air-launched, in addition to several other type of systems such as the Agni Prime, which is under the SFC, and it has a 2,000 kilometer range and it has maneuverable warheads, and it is canisterized. So canisterized means that it can be launched at short notice. The Agni 5 test was conducted in 2024, and then the MIRV version of the Agni 5 test, we all know that has a range of more than 8,000 kilometers and can carry anywhere between 5 to 10 nuclear warheads. They've recently conducted tests of the K4, K5 prototype technology demonstrators for the submarine-launched ballistic missiles. Now, the K5 has a range of 5 to 6,000 kilometers. It can carry anywhere between 3 to 5 multiple warheads. The K6 has a range of anywhere between 8 to 12,000 kilometers, which will be deployed on the S5 class submarines. Currently, India has 4 type of Arihant class submarines, which can carry the K4, the 3500 K4 submarine-launched ballistic missile, which can only carry a single warhead. But if once they are able to develop the S5 class submarine, there will be about 13,000 tons. So they can carry a much larger payload of MIRV systems. So taken together, India will have around 8 to 10 SSBNs between now and 2035. That is the timeline, and they will be able to deploy anywhere between 250 and 300 warheads on submarines alone. So many of those submarines, because they will be nuclear-powered ballistic missile submarines, they will be part of India's deterrence at sea posture, which means that the command and the control will be delegated, and those submarines can be at patrol at least half of them could be at patrol at any given time in the Indian Ocean or elsewhere. Their targets are definitely going to be China and Pakistan. So this is an important question, because once these capabilities mature over time, so capabilities invariably always lead to intentions, and intentions can change. At one time, the United States was very friendly with China after 1971, but later on, China is now the biggest competitor, strategic competitor for the United States. Similarly, if you look at India's strategic culture, it is quite clear that they are very territorial about their strategic autonomy, and they have this enormous self-image of a great and rising power, which is being fueled by their designation as the so-called net security provider by the United States. But over a period of time, given their track record over the last 50, 60 years, it will not be surprising to see that they might adopt a belligerent posture towards other countries. And it's very interesting because the United States, the entire extended deterrence strategy of the United States to give the nuclear umbrella to many allies such as Japan, such as South Korea and Germany, etc., others, was principally designed to stop nuclear proliferation, to prevent the incentive for these countries to develop their own nuclear capabilities, even though they were allies. So you can imagine that the kind of threat that could emerge and the kind of friction that could emerge between the United States and India over the next decade, principally because of India's domestic strategic culture and because of the fact that they consider themselves as an autonomous, so-called net security provider in the Indian Ocean region. So India is a nuclear armed state outside the nuclear non-proliferation treaty. So one of the dichotomies created from the exceptionalism given to them as part of the nuclear suppliers group ever in 2008 at the conclusion of the India-US nuclear deal was that a very large part of India's strategic nuclear program that was outside the safeguards of IAEA, even though they claim it is civilian, was granted de facto recognition by the IAEA and the nuclear suppliers in 2008. So now that people are talking of, after the Israel-Iran conflict and after the fact that the safeguards are not so perfect in Iran anymore, the question about the impending demise of the non-proliferation regime in the wake of US attacks on Iranian facilities also. I think this process started with the India-US nuclear deal in 2008. The erosion of the sanctity of the non-proliferation regime, because the non-proliferation regime itself, after the NPT came into force in the early 1970s, and especially after India's 1974 tests, was violated by the international community in 2008 when these exceptions were granted, with no obligations for India as a nuclear armed state. So the non-proliferation regime that suffered the first blow in 1974 when a civilian research reactor was used to produce plutonium for India's first nuclear weapon test. At that point, the Nuclear Supplies Group was created. Pakistan became the victim of the non-proliferation sanctions, even for civilian technology under IAEA safeguards. So one of the senior IAEA officials, they told the chairman of the Pakistan Atomic Energy Commission, who was visiting the Board of Governors to highlight the implications of India's test in June 1974, that India had committed the original sin, but Pakistan will have to bear the consequences, which is exactly what happened. So there was complete civilian technology denial to both India and Pakistan, but India had already acquired most of the know-how and the transfer of technology for their civilian program, which became the basis of the 8 indigenous power reactors that are outside safeguards, producing 1.2 tons of plutonium every year. So in terms of organizations, I think probably the only multilateral forum that is out there that can be of any use is the Conference on Disarmament in Geneva. But over there also, Pakistan's position is that the existing asymmetries need to be taken into account if there has to be a meaningful progress towards arms control and disarmament. Because India already has a very clear edge in fissile material stockpiles outside IAEA safeguards. So that itself gives India the confidence that it can pursue a strategy of nuclear superiority, for which, if you look at their language in their land warfare doctrine and their joint doctrine of 2017 and 18, for the first time, the Indian military leadership has started talking of full spectrum conflict, escalation dominance, and trying to achieve escalation dominance against Pakistan while deterring China along the line of actual control. Now, the dilemma for Indian strategists is because of, after 2020 Galwan crisis with China, half of their offensive capability is now deployed both against China and Pakistan. It is now divided. They don't have the decisive conventional edge over Pakistan that they once had, which is an additional driver for India's nuclear buildup and for India to leverage its latent and hedging nuclear capability, for which, and that is witnessed through different statements about their nuclear, about the no first use. As far back as 2019, I think Rajnath Singh, defense minister, went to Pokhran, the nuclear test site, and said that India's nuclear no first use is not etched in stone. The former head of India's Strategic Forces Command, General B.S. Nagal, he has written several articles arguing that India needs to have another look at its no first use. But India is already building the capabilities that will give it the operational flexibility for a counterforce strategy against its adversaries, mainly against Pakistan, and also probably against China at some point. Because if you look at the nuclear balance between India and China, they are almost equal, at least in terms of fissile material stockpiles.
Yes.